Hi, everyone. Welcome to Learning by Leading, a podcast that brings stories of young people from across India who are reimagining leadership, care, and justice in their communities. I'm Ayat Aziz, and I'm here with my friends Tanvi, Philo, and Joshua. All four of us are part of different collectives. We work on different issues and we carry out our different identities. But what ties us together is that we're all trying to build something that holds space for differences without falling apart. Navigating internal tensions is something every collective has to deal with, especially when we all coming from different religions, castes, genders, regions, and beliefs. It's kind of an emotional labor, it's care work, and honestly, it's political work. For me, being a visible Muslim woman coming from Kashmir, working on climate justice and storytelling, it often means that I walk into rooms where I carry both hope as well as hesitation. Sometimes I feel powerful, sometimes it's isolating. There are days when I feel seen, I feel held, and other days when I feel like I'm constantly explaining and defending a lot of parts of myself. But I keep showing up because we need to own the narrative. My story matters, and so do the stories of my community. When I kept showing up to these spaces, so I remember once after a session, someone came to me and said that you're really empowered as a hijabi Muslim. You have a voice. They meant it as a compliment, but it kind of stung because it wasn't just about me, it was about all the people they didn't expect to hear from. That's when I realized your existence is very important. It has to be loud, it has to be confident, and it has to be unapologetic. And that's a part of work in itself. So, Tanvi, I know you've worked in spaces where most of the people are Muslim, so there's the kind of shared identity, but even there tensions show up, right? So how do you understand internal conflict when it comes from within a shared space?
So thanks, Ayat. Whatever you said, really, I have been in the same space. And whenever I have been in this space, there was always a deep tension. And I've seen how caste, gender, roles, political learnings, and even generational gap shape how people show and what they feel, while they express. For example, I might share faith with someone, but as a woman speaking on a domestic violence or domestic leadership, I've often found myself pushing against silence. And when it comes to even when it comes to those spaces, it shows up that who's centered, who's speaking, who listens, and everyone is very different. Like it's always been in this way that the area where I have been working, especially I have been working in the Mumbai sector of the slums. For example, some people who listen and who don't listen. It's like whenever you speak to them, it's like someone would be there who would listen to what you're trying to express, and someone would be there who would not try to understand what you're trying to tell them. So there are a lot of conflicts, and those conflicts always come from the outside. Maybe if they want to do it, but at the same time there'll be somebody who will be trying to push them out, and they'll be like, why you are supporting them. For example, there are a lot of women who really want to speak up, and they want to do something for themselves, but maybe there'll be a male dominant, somebody who would be there, and they try to be like, okay, listen, as because you are coming from this particular community, you're not supposed to speak up, something like that. So usually this thing always happens. And if when you ask yourself how it is rooted in those spaces, I really sometimes feel that it's a hard conversation when when if something like this comes up. It's very uncomfortable for those people to speak up, because of not only male dominance, but due to lot of societal pressure, as well as religious pressures. So I feel like you rightly said, because it's not only about a Muslim community, it's everywhere. But right now, staying in India, Muslim, they have been targeted. But I work in the slums, so the mentality is very different, as compared to if you go to a higher society. So all these things you literally matter in their, maybe you can say the environment or their education and a lot of other things. It's like if you're going to educate them, they would be like, we have been doing this and this is what we will follow, until and unless there is somebody who would just come up front and fight for their rights. What how we work is we usually do theater or any mediums of arts. That's how we try to communicate with people, because going and speaking to them just in general, rather than just making maybe a piece of a skit, or maybe through a jingle, or maybe through a film, a short film. We try to communicate with people in such a way where it's easy for them to understand. So we try to use any mediums of arts, and through that source we try to communicate in such environment, because it's been almost 2 years and bringing the trust in us. So we actually have realized that when we started doing continuously, like maybe in a week we start doing something like maybe a nukkad natak is done on the street, for them to understand through their ways. We have to go to their level, to their ground level, to understand what is happening, and that's how we give them their answers in a maybe in a very entertaining way, so that it is connected and they are with us. So, and usually this thing happens. So what we try to do is we first try to bring people on board who actually connect with us, because like if one person is converted, maybe eventually we'll have more 10 people to join us. So that's how we usually bring everyone on board. So it's just like you have to convince one person, and when you're connected with one, so that one person can bring more two, and then that two can bring more three. So that's how it goes. So the conflict doesn't always come from the outside, it often comes within, and that can feel sharper because it challenges your sense of belongings. You ask yourself, how do I stay rooted in these spaces and still push it to grow? For me, the work is not giving up, it's staying in those hard conversations, even when it means being the one to name something uncomfortable, and also in recognizing when to pause, when to listen, when to make space for others to speak into that discomfort too. So, even shared identity doesn't mean shared understanding, and holding spaces for that differences is not easy. Philo, I want to bring you in here. You've been a part of the collectives where emotions run high and care becomes an invisible job. Have there been moments where you had to step in or step back to protect the space? How do you decide what's worth addressing and what's worth letting go?
That's a fundamental concern, Tanvi, especially from a leadership standpoint. Uh, from my context, I run a small eco-social entrepreneurship, which is completely led by women, most of whom are daily wage earners. We're a small, tight-knit group that's grown together in love and solidarity over many years. So in our space, there is literally nothing a woman cannot do, whether it's climbing ladders to reach high on the shelf, or repairing machinery, or any heavy duty labor for that matter, that are mostly, done by men. It's a truly self-empowering group where we bring out the best in each other. But like you said, emotions certainly run high, and care becomes an invisible job. Even with all the laughter and high spirits that we share together, the group always navigates some level of internal tension that is often resolved informally with minimal intervention from my end. But when such tensions are aggravated by individual hierarchies within the group, for example, seniority for that matter, or hurts personal sentiments or challenges our collective ethos, I have no choice but to step in to mediate. That's when it can get hard, because I share a close bond with each person in the group. So holding a conflict as an unbiased facilitator becomes delicate and sometimes mentally taxing. Still, I've learned that staying with this discomfort and listening empathetically on both sides and reconciling respectfully without compromising on moral grounds has been very essential for the group. The emotional toil may be real and unavoidable, but holding these spaces for conflicts have been fundamental in building our collective and making it stronger. And sometimes we don't even realize how much emotional labor goes into just keeping the group going. And Joshua, I know you've talked before about how the radical left can sometimes push people away when it gets too punitive or rigid. How have you experienced that? And what's helped you move toward more restorative ways of dealing with conflict, especially when power and mental health are in the mix?
It's a really interesting question. And I think before I answer it, I want to establish that most of my experiences come from being a part of and working with queer collectives. Some of it now in my later years, I focus more on mental health. But in the past, it was usually just general collectives that were groups of queer people that necessarily didn't focus on mental health, but often ended up having to support the mental health of a lot of people. So before I was a community leader, I was a member of community. And I remember some of the first conflicts I had as a community member was with leadership. And I do remember a lot of very punitive, very sort of like aggressively politically correct approaches to building community that I saw around me that I kind of imbibed and learned, unfortunately, in seeing how the leaders of spaces would respond to conflict, respond to differences of opinion, and immediately squash anything. There was this unspoken idea that everyone has to agree with each other. Everyone has to sort of be on the same page, politically speaking. Everyone has to be left wing for some reason. Everyone has to know the correct terminology, has to sort of keep themselves up to date. It was seen as a sort of a personal moral responsibility to be up to date about, the sensitive thing to say, the politically correct thing to say. And unfortunately, this meant that a lot of leftist community spaces were not accessible to people who didn't have access to that language, and was also very hurtful and punishing to people who were just learning and just trying to understand their identities and just trying to understand what it means to be in community. So weirdly enough, there was no space for actual repair of conflict. There was no space for actual, building people up together, of supporting each other. It was very much like you have to be perfect or leave. And you have to agree with everything maybe the people in power believe because they're right, or you leave if you don't like it. But because the community was so geared towards punishing anything that seemed, not politically correct, the community space became so unsafe and so tense and so, fraught with conflict and harm that was enabled by the leaders. And that kind of made me realize that there is a need for kindness and empathy to be a central tenet of spaces. And I feel like that's something the radical left, sometimes extreme left spaces can miss out on. Is that, and that's why they say sometimes when you go so far left, you are no different. It's hard to distinguish you from the extreme right because both can be extremely sometimes, violent or unforgiving in their approaches to community. But I realize there's so much importance for empathy, togetherness, repairing and understanding conflict. And that's something I learned later on. Like, I can't even say that I was good at it right from the beginning. No, I was bad at it. I was also like equally punitive in my push to conflict and was like very much like, yeah, you know, people do bad things. I see everyone do treat them horribly. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's the way to deal with people who do bad things. Until it came to a point where I had issues with people in leadership and I was given the power to actually do something about it. And I was like, I don't think I want to do the same thing with this power that they did to me. And it was interesting because I remember having to call out a person in power for abusing their power and using it to kind of maybe groom younger queer people into maybe, behaviors that were not appropriate for someone in the position of power. And I remember still being like, as much as this person has wronged me and wronged other people, I still want to hold space for a conversation with them. I still want to give them a chance to understand what they did that they could have done differently. And that person actually genuinely reflected and apologized and took full responsibility for the harm they caused. and stepped out of leadership in these spaces and voluntarily left a lot of spaces where they had caused harm, and actively reached out to try to unlearn and learn better about like how, to be more wary of the power that they have. So that for me was like, oh, okay, so that's what maybe like, you know repair looks like, is what happens after. Who's taking care of the person after maybe conflict has happened? Who is holding space? Who is kind of guiding and supporting them? So interestingly, yeah, I'm obviously I'm still getting there. There's a lot to be done, unfortunately, in terms of learning how to be more restorative. But a lot of times it is having space for difficult emotions with difficult, I wouldn't say difficult people, but people who are in difficult places, and having to really understand that everyone has their own journeys and everyone has their own traumas and their own needs. And community isn't about making sure everyone is exactly the same, but just about like how we move a bit towards, you know, allowing for different people with different needs and different conflicts and different styles of communication and different beliefs to kind of come together and still be respectful.
Thanks, Joshua. It was really insightful, and that really hit. We really don't talk about what happens after the conflict, the quiet work of rebuilding, re entering, and, staying. With that, let's just take a short break here. I want to come back to something we touched on earlier, the idea of having safe spaces, especially for the marginalized communities where you have to look at things from the intersectional lenses. So, what does it mean to hold a safe space? And is it even possible when everyone is just so different and everyone just carries their own different histories of hurt? Tanvi, what does safety mean in spaces you hold, and who gets to feel safe in those environments?
When we talk about holding safe spaces, it's easy to assume it means everything and everyone feels completely comfortable. And, it's about freeness and, they should not feel harmed about it. But the reality is much more complicated, especially when people bring them from different, they come from different communities, or they are coming from different histories. Like, maybe they have some trauma or hurt or something like that. For me, safety isn't a fixed or a universal feeling. It's shaped by who's in the room and whose experiences are being centered. In many spaces, it's often assumed to mean the comfort of the dominant group, whether that's along lines of caste, gender, religious authorities, or what feels safe from one person might be something where someone must be silencing it, or someone must be feeling threatened about it. For example, Muslim women raising her voice about gender justice might just not feel safe in the space priorities preserving religious respectability over speaking hard truths. But at the same time, dynamics might make someone from a marginalized background feels invisible. So even it's like basically, so holding safe spaces means constantly asking those who are feeling safe about if they are being centered, or someone who feels free to speak, someone who feels forced to stay silent. It means making space for discomforts and conflicts. And eventually, it's never a perfect thing, but at the same time, it's not even that simple. But I also believe that safety is something we have to work together, and we should work on it to to understand if if they just feel safe about whatever they are speaking. And for example, if someone has said something, they just, to be very honest, a lot of time it just happens this way, that a lot of people, they just speak up, and then they realize, oh, I shouldn't have spoken about it because maybe someone sitting there or someone around me must be judging me. So, that's how usually it happens. So I feel that a space where people are free to speak and they're not being judged, maybe it could just be another day for that person. It's not necessary that a person is just going through just a normal life. It's maybe they must be having something or the other happening around. Maybe that day they must be not feeling safe, or maybe another day they must be feeling safe. So it is just according to how things are, with them. So I really feel that, like, for example, we are speaking right now. If we don't feel safe, I don't think so we'll be able to speak. So yeah.
Thank you, Tanvi. I completely agree with you. Uh, Safe spaces can only be co-created, and it's not a one size that fits all. And safe spaces are also not simple or perfect, but they are essential. Uh, I think the very act of co-creating safety with the members in our collective is how we build mutual trust. And this holds spaces for internal conflict. But like I said, given the diversity of realities and lived experiences that we all bring together, it cannot be a one size mold, and it needs to be experimented with and co-built. From my experience with the women in my collective, we've seen that safety is often look like a closed room, or sometimes even a moving picnic bus when we go on a picnic once a year, where they can just be in those small yet very grand moments. You see something magical taking place. First, they temporarily, sort of let go of the burdens that they carry every day, the responsibility they have as breadwinners for the family, as domestic workers in their house, caregivers, the break that they never have. So this moment is utilized as a break, and they listen to some very raw form of folk music, and they start dancing, they laugh, and they also teach me and those around, I mean, within the collective, they teach each other, bring everyone on dance floor. And then slowly you see conversations surface, and they start talking about themselves. They talk about how little time they have for themselves. And also, funnily enough, they keep saying, what if someone saw us right now? We'd definitely be judged. I'm glad my mother-in-law was not with us in the picnic today. So you see they slowly start to articulate things that you'd never thought would be in their head. And with that music, dancing, and sharing of stories, you see a sort of quiet shift that happens. What seems very relaxing on the surface for all of us becomes, I've seen, becomes something radical, because they are not only reconciling uh, amongst themselves, they are also reclaiming joy. And it is something that they hardly ever get to do. And we are collectively naming how deeply fatigued these gender roles that each of us carry have made us. So for us, this safe space isn't one of silence or, uh, you know, emotional depth, emotionally deep conversations or even stillness, but it's movement, it's joy, it's dance, and it's also the freedom to heal, even though it's only for a little while, a short span, maybe once every month.
From my personal experiences, being a visible Muslim, it's really hard, especially in the current scenario that's in India. Just going there on different platforms, speaking and expressing yourself openly is also a big challenge. And especially when you're not confident about uh, the things that you're speaking about, it's really hard. And there are, people who self-censor themselves because they don't want to put themselves through trouble, or sometimes they can't articulate things in the way that it will be politically correct, which also becomes a challenge. So we lose a lot of, learning. We lose a lot of narrative around that. So a lot of stories are left behind because of these things. But while I work, I have seen young girls coming up to me and, saying that I kind of inspired them in, sharing their voices, or just made them a little more comfortable in sharing their experiences, and understanding what an intersectional lens is, and how to understand that people can come from different backgrounds but still have a common point. So you don't have to accept everything that the other person has, but you have to be accommodative to not, oppose them in ways that could be disrespectful, or something that is, you can disagree with people, but it should be with kindness and with respect. So I think that's very important. And when working with people from different backgrounds, all of us have, multiple burdens that we carry, as Philo mentioned. But we need to be respectful towards each other. And I think empathy is something that goes a long way. So empathy is a really big word uh, when it comes in action as well. But I believe that, when people just become more open minded, and they just understand and try to actively listen to other person's perspective, not to disagree, but to actually understand their standpoint, is something that helps in making, collectives better, in making a society better in a larger extent.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ayat. And yeah, I think as everyone is sharing about like what makes a safe space, I'm also trying to think about like what accountability and healing look like in spaces like this. And something that I always, so as a counseling psychologist, this often comes up in sessions. And something I realize for myself and a lot of Indian people is that we're taught that punishment is accountability. We're taught that when you do something wrong, you feel bad. And if you feel bad enough, you'll change. So that pain is what motivates people to change. And accountability looks like you going through the pain. Maybe you like beat yourself up, maybe you're like angry at yourself, maybe isolate from people, maybe you like, just like for us, our idea is that pain means accountability, but the reality is that accountability doesn't need pain. It just needs change. Like it just means taking the opportunity to learn and do better and do differently. And I feel like a lot of times in communities, that's something that we forget, is that we're like, okay, this person has been told that you've done something hurtful. Now you're feeling bad, which means that's a good thing, right? You are suffering, which means that you're facing the consequences of your actions. But that's not actual accountability, that's just consequences. Accountability is when I think we like take the opportunity from sometimes from the pain, sometimes just from reflection to kind of understand what we're doing that could be maybe diminishing community or a connection with other people, and actively working on that in terms of like accountability and healing beyond just maybe apologizing, of just really understanding what went wrong and then working to do it differently. A gentle, conversation where all feelings were welcome, where we all shared about, maybe some of us felt hurt, some of us felt cornered, some of us felt, alarmed or unsafe, and just willing to acknowledge that the very messy emotions that come out of that, and recognizing that repair sometimes just looks like acknowledging the harm that's caused, and also then asking each other, what would we like to do differently next time? What would you like us to do differently so that you don't feel cornered again to the point where you feel like you have to protect yourself? What would we like you to do differently, maybe, so that the next time, you may say something that is hurtful to us, what can we do to respond or to maybe have that accountability? So it's always a lot of conversations, a lot of like understanding and empathy, as Ayat said, that really has to come into the picture. But I think that work and that effort is sometimes like a lot of, us highlighted today, an invisible part of what goes into creating and building communities and making that happen. I think it depends on the context of the collective. When we talk about like differences of opinion that are like, I fundamentally disagree with your existence as a person versus, I think maybe black is a better color to use for the logo than red. Those are very different kinds of conflicts that we're talking about. When abuse is caused and the person who has experienced the abuse is still kind of recovering from it, no matter how much work the other person is putting into addressing that. I think sometimes part of building community is acknowledging that not every conflict can be repaired, and that's okay. Not every relationship can be mended, and that's okay. I think part of building community is recognizing that I think there will be tension, there will be disagreement, but there will also be sometimes wounds that take years to heal if they ever heal at all. And it's also recognizing maybe whose access to community is determined by maybe whose behavior. Like, is your access to community preventing other people from being able to access community? Like, then that's also something we have to think about as well. Like, when we think of prioritizing a person's access to community, knowing that they have caused other people harm to the point where other people may not feel safe in community, right? Should the community expand to include all those experiences, or do we have to draw boundaries? I think that's always a difficult conversation to have because there is no clear answer to that. How do you determine that this person is not fit for community, right? That's a really harmful thing to do to that person. But also, how do we ignore the fact that maybe this person has caused harm to other people, right? Sometimes it means that maybe this community or this collective or this space is not the space for you. Maybe there are other spaces that are more suited to your needs. But also, sometimes it's like, as a community, as a collective, do we need to grow to hold space for this kind of conflict and these varying needs? Do we have to expand our capacity? So I feel like that balance is never easy to figure out. But again, it really, really depends on like context. So there's no clear answer, basically.
Yeah, so I want to bring in the generational lens to it, that how different generations look at things is also different, and it's a task when it comes to younger generation explaining things to older generation, because they think younger people are very, very arrogant, like, and they do not have experience, and a lot of times they think that we take decisions really quickly, like we don't put thought behind it. So it's really difficult to make them understand things from that point of view. But I think a lot of young people also give in into this whole generational trauma that they carry forward. But I think that when we work in collectives, when we build safe spaces, it is also important to have discussions around the traumas that we have, especially from the backgrounds we come from, because sometimes they're very explicit, but sometimes they're very implicit, and we don't really recognize them. But this trauma is passed down to each generation without even realizing. But I think if there is generational trauma, there is generational healing as well that could be, put forward. So I think we as Gen Zs or Gen Alpha also coming in, we can be the ones who turn it into generational healing rather than moving it forward as a generational trauma.
Aayat articulated it very beautifully, and Joshua for looking at it in such a nuanced yet sensitive manner. Thank you for articulating what was in many of our heads. I just wanted to add that this intergenerational existence, it's there in our collective. So we have people from 3 generations within. So there is, stereotypes and biases that get passed down. And at the same time, like I said, there are ways resilience also gets passed down. So I think one note of optimism is that when there is when sometimes when it looks like we are going against something that the other generation is not able to understand or empathize with, because it is not how their reality was in shaped. It's a good thing, because it means that you are finally moving away from a stereotypical mold that has been passed on to generation, and that revolutions have taken place in the past for me as a person to stand up for myself. And the fact that there are previous generation members who are opposing me is a testament as to how far we've come far. But I think it's, even though it is riddled with conflict, it is a note of optimism that can take us forward.
I would just like to add something to whatever Ayat, Philo, and Joshua said. So I have also personally been through the similar situation, and I think over the time things have changed, because earlier I was quite traumatized about it because I was quite young, and then I think it takes time, but you at the end of the day you heal. I mean, but it takes years, if it's too deep, it takes years to come out of it.
So, yeah, this conversation, I think, has left me with more questions than answers, and I think that's okay. But I think one thing that I've learned from our conversations today is that collectives aren't built in moments of agreement always. They're built also in how we hold each other through tension with care, clarity, and sometimes also a lot of silence. So conflict doesn't mean necessarily that we failed. It just means we're real people coming together as real people. And in a world that often asks us to shrink or separate, being able to stay with each other in all our complexity, that's what makes, the work that we do so radical. So if this conversation resonated with you, please do share it. And if you've been through conflict in your own collectives or your own community spaces, we'd love to hear how you held that conflict or how it held you. So, yes, until next time, take care, stay grounded, and remember difference isn't something we survive, it's something we build with.